When a billionaire caught his maid's daughter feeding his disabled son, he expected disobedience. Instead, he witnessed an act of kindness that would upend every rule of his world. She wasn't supposed to be there, just a maid's daughter, waiting in a mansion that wasn't hers. Rain whispered against the glass, and somewhere in that endless house, a lonely boy sat watching the storm through a window he couldn't reach. "Hello," she said softly. He turned, startled, two children divided by worlds, about to be bound by one small act of kindness. No one saw the peanut butter sandwich in her hand as anything more than food. But it would change everything. It would awaken a father's heart, unravel lies, and test the meaning of loyalty and love. And what started as a child's quiet gesture ended as a reckoning that would shake an empire. This is the story of how a simple act of grace rewrote the fate of everyone who witnessed it. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Enjoy the story. A little girl's simple kindness would unravel a world of secrets. What she offered was a sandwich, but what she was about to receive was a life she never imagined. The old grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 7 times. Each deep, resonant gong echoed through the cavernous halls of the Croft mansion. The sound seemed to count the seconds Abigail Hayes had been waiting for her mother. From her perch on a stiff velvet bench, 10-year-old Abby watched the rain. It fell in silver streaks against the tall, arched windows, blurring the perfectly manicured gardens into a watercolor of green and gray. Her mother, Eleanor, was a maid here. She cleaned the endless marble floors and dusted surfaces that seemed to gather no dust at all. Eleanor was quiet and careful, moving through the grand house like a ghost. Abby knew her mother's rules by heart. Sit here. Do not wander. Do not touch anything. And most importantly, do not be a bother. Abby was good at following the rules. She had her worn copy of Treasure Island to keep her company, its pages soft as cloth. She also had her dinner, 2 peanut butter sandwiches, an apple, and a small carton of milk, packed neatly in her lunchbox. Tonight, however, the book lay forgotten on the bench beside her. Her stomach grumbled, but she ignored it. She was more interested in the boy. She had only seen him in glimpses before. His name was Leo. He was Harrison Croft's son, a boy who lived in a world of polished silence. Today, he was in the grand sunroom that overlooked the west lawn. He sat in a sleek, black wheelchair, his back to the house. He faced the rain-soaked garden, his small shoulders slumped. A caregiver, a stern woman named Ms. Albright, had wheeled him there after his tutoring session an hour ago. Then she had left him, disappearing into another part of the mansion with her phone pressed to her ear. He had been alone ever since. Abby's heart felt a small, painful pinch. He looked like the loneliest boy in the world. Her grandfather, General Marcus Hayes, had told her once that no soldier should ever be left behind. She decided that no boy should be, either. Checking to make sure the long hallway was empty, Abby slipped off the bench. Her sneakers made no sound on the thick Persian rug. She clutched her lunchbox, its metal handle cool against her palm. She knew she was breaking the rules, but the sight of the boy's hunched figure pushed her forward. It felt more important than any rule. She pushed open the heavy oak door to the sunroom. The air inside smelled of damp earth and blooming orchids. Leo didn't turn. He seemed lost in the rhythm of the rain drumming against the glass ceiling. "Hello." Abby's voice was barely a whisper. The boy flinched. He slowly turned his wheelchair to face her. He had kind, dark eyes and hair the color of sand. His legs were covered by a soft gray blanket. He looked at her with a mixture of surprise and caution, as if he expected her to vanish. "You're not supposed to be in here," he said. His voice was quiet, but clear. "I know," Abby admitted. She took a step closer. "My mom is Eleanor. She's finishing up. I saw you sitting here by yourself." He nodded, looking away again. "Ms. Albright is on a call. She said to wait." Abby looked at the clock on the sunroom wall. It was well past 7. "That was a long time ago. Are you hungry?" Leo shrugged, a small, uncertain movement of his shoulders. "I guess." Abby's decision was made. She walked over and sat on the floor cushions near his wheelchair. She opened her lunchbox with a soft click. The smell of peanut butter filled the air. She took out one of her sandwiches, neatly cut in half and wrapped in wax paper. "My mom makes the best ones," she said, holding out a piece to him. "It's not much, but you can have it." For a moment, Leo just stared at the offering. His eyes were wide, and a flicker of something unreadable passed through them. He looked from the sandwich to Abby's face, as if trying to understand a difficult puzzle. Then, slowly, he reached out a pale hand and took it. His fingers brushed against hers. "Thank you," he mumbled. He took a small bite. A tiny smile touched the corners of his mouth. "It is good." They ate in a comfortable silence, listening to the rain. Abby gave him the other half of the sandwich, and then her apple. She told him about her grandfather, the famous general, and the medals he kept in a polished wooden box. Leo told her about his books. He loved stories about stars and distant galaxies, places he could visit in his mind. For the first time all evening, he wasn't just the billionaire's disabled son. He was just Leo. And Abby wasn't just the maid's daughter. She was just Abby. They did not know they were being watched. Upstairs, in his vast, dark-paneled office, Harrison Croft stood motionless by the window. He had finished his own conference call early, an unexpected reprieve in a day filled with ruthless negotiations. He had been about to summon Ms. Albright to inquire about his son's evening when he saw the little blonde girl slip into the sunroom. At 48, Harrison Croft was a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires from steel, glass, and sheer force of will. He was precise. He was demanding. He saw the world as a series of transactions, assets, and liabilities. Emotions were a variable he had long ago learned to control and distrust. Kindness, in his experience, was usually a currency, offered in the expectation of a return. He watched the small scene unfold below. He saw the girl, this maid's daughter, offer his son her own simple dinner. There was no hesitation. There was no one there to impress. It was a pure, uncomplicated act of grace. He saw the way Leo's posture changed, his shoulders straightening just a little. He saw the genuine, unguarded smile that appeared on his son's face, a smile Harrison himself had not seen in months. A strange, unfamiliar feeling tightened in his chest. He had hired the best caregivers, the most expensive tutors, the most qualified therapists. He had provided Leo with every material advantage a boy could ever want. Yet, his son remained walled off, enclosed in a fortress of quiet sorrow that no amount of money could breach. But this little girl, with nothing to offer but a peanut butter sandwich and a story about her grandfather, had walked right through the gates. He saw Ms. Albright finally bustle into the sunroom, her face a mask of false concern. "Leo, there you are. I'm so sorry, my call ran longer than." She trailed off, her eyes landing on Abby. Her expression soured. What are you doing here? You know the rules." Abby scrambled to her feet, her cheeks flushing with shame. "I'm sorry. He just looked lonely." "That is not your concern," Ms. Albright snapped, her voice sharp. "Go back to the foyer and wait for your mother." Leo's smile vanished. "She wasn't bothering me." "Hush, Leo." The caregiver began to turn his wheelchair around, her movements brisk and dismissive. From his window, Harrison's jaw tightened. He had seen enough. He turned from the window, his gray eyes cold and hard as granite. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Beverly," he said, "find Eleanor Hayes for me. Bring her and her daughter to my office. Now." Then he paused, his gaze drifting back to the sunroom. "And tell Ms. Albright she is no longer needed. Have security escort her from the premises immediately." The air in the office was thick with unspoken questions. Eleanor Hayes stood before the massive oak desk, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was a woman who had learned to make herself small, to be invisible. But right now, under the intense gaze of Harrison Croft, she felt as if she were under a microscope. Abby stood beside her, holding her mother's hand, her small face pale. "Mr. Croft, sir," Eleanor began, her voice trembling slightly. "I am so sorry about Abigail. I told her to stay put. She broke the rules. It will not happen again. Please, don't." She couldn't finish the sentence. The fear of losing her job was a cold knot in her stomach. This job was all that stood between her and desperation. Harrison held up a hand, silencing her. He didn't look angry. He looked thoughtful. His gaze shifted from Eleanor to the small girl beside her. "Your daughter's name is Abigail?" he asked. His voice was softer than Eleanor had ever heard it. "Yes, sir. We call her Abby." He nodded slowly. "Abby," he said, addressing her directly. "Why did you go into the sunroom tonight?" Abby swallowed hard. She looked at her mother, then back at the powerful man behind the desk. She decided to tell the truth. Your son, Leo, he looked sad, she said quietly. My grandfather always said you don't leave people behind when they're alone. So I went to sit with him. Harrison leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished wood. And you gave him your dinner. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He looked hungry, Abby replied simply. For a long moment, Harrison Croft was silent. He studied the child before him. She wasn't afraid of him, not really. She was direct, honest, and possessed a quiet strength that seemed far beyond her years. He glanced at her file, which his assistant Beverly had placed on his desk just minutes before. Eleanor Hayes. Widow. Daughter. Abigail Hayes, age 10. Father. Captain Daniel Hayes, deceased. Grandfather. General Marcus Hayes. The name hit him like a physical blow. General Hayes. A man who was a legend. A man of unwavering integrity and courage. Harrison had met the general once, years ago, at a charity event. He had been struck by the man's profound sense of honor. And this was his granddaughter. It made a strange kind of sense. Honor, it seemed, was hereditary. Mrs. Hayes, Harrison said, his tone shifting. It was no longer the voice of an employer addressing a maid. It was the voice of a man making a decision. Your current duties primarily involve housekeeping on the second floor, correct? Eleanor blinked, thrown by the sudden change in topic. Yes, sir. That and assisting with laundry. That is about to change, he stated. He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping a few feet in front of them. The sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. I have been looking for a house manager for some time. Someone to oversee the staff, manage the schedules, and ensure the entire estate runs with precision. The position requires integrity, diligence, and an unimpeachable character. It comes with a significant salary increase and private accommodations here on the estate. Eleanor's head spun. She couldn't be hearing this right. Sir, I don't understand. I'm a maid. You are General Hayes's daughter, Harrison corrected her gently. And you have raised a daughter who, in one simple act, has shown more compassion and decency than any of the highly paid professionals I have hired to care for my son. His gaze fell back to Abby. Leo needs a friend. He needs someone who sees him, not his wheelchair, not his father's money. He has been withdrawn for a very long time. Tonight, I saw him smile. A real smile. He looked back at Eleanor, his expression serious. I am offering you the position of house manager, Mrs. Hayes. The accommodations would be the two-bedroom cottage behind the main garden. It would mean you and Abigail would live here. It would also mean that Abigail would be available as a companion for Leo after her school hours. She would be compensated for her time, of course. A trust fund will be established for her education. Eleanor was speechless. Her mind couldn't process the words. A cottage, a salary, a trust fund, a life free from the constant, gnawing worry about rent and bills. It felt like a dream. She looked down at her daughter, at the little girl whose simple, heartfelt kindness had just shattered their world and rebuilt it into something unimaginable. There is one condition, Harrison said, his voice turning firm. Abigail's influence on my son is to be encouraged. Her values, her character. I want Leo to learn what it means to be a Hayes. A tear escaped Eleanor's eye, and she quickly brushed it away. For the first time in a very long time, it was a tear of hope. She looked at the billionaire, this powerful, intimidating man, and saw something she never expected, a father desperate to find a glimmer of light for his son. We accept, Mr. Croft, she said, her voice filled with a profound gratitude that left no room for any other emotion. Thank you. Harrison gave a curt nod, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Good. Beverly will handle the details. You can move into the cottage this weekend. Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Hayes. And you, Abigail. As they left the opulent office and walked down the grand staircase, Abby squeezed her mother's hand. The world had just tilted on its axis. The rules had all been rewritten. She had only wanted to make a lonely boy feel better. She had no idea she had just opened a door into a new life. But as they stepped out into the now clear night air, she also had a feeling that this was only the beginning of the story. She was right. The move to the garden cottage felt like stepping into a fairy tale. It was a charming stone house, covered in ivy, with a small porch and window boxes overflowing with bright red geraniums. Inside, it was nothing like their old, cramped apartment. It had warm wooden floors, a cozy fireplace, and 2 bedrooms with soft beds and windows that looked out onto a sea of roses. For the first time, Abby had her own room. She spent the first night just staring out her window at the stars, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. Her mother, Eleanor, transformed. Freed from the drudgery of her old job and the constant weight of financial worry, she seemed to grow taller. As house manager, she was firm but fair, earning the respect of the staff who had once been her peers. She organized schedules, managed supplies, and brought a quiet, steady competence to the running of the massive estate. Harrison Croft had been right. She had an innate dignity and strength that had simply been waiting for an opportunity to shine. But the real change was in the friendship between Abby and Leo. Their afternoons became a sacred ritual. After Abby finished her schoolwork, which she now did at a small oak desk in her own sunlit room, she would find Leo. Sometimes they would be in the mansion's vast library, a magnificent 2-story room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. Leo, an avid reader, would show her his favorite books on astronomy. He would point out constellations in worn-out star charts, his voice full of wonder as he described nebulas and distant galaxies. "That one is Orion," he'd explain, tracing the stars with a finger. "My dad says the stars are just balls of gas burning billions of miles away. But I think they're more than that. I think they're holes in the floor of heaven." Abby, in turn, would read him chapters from Treasure Island, her voice full of excitement as she described pirates and buried gold. She brought adventure into his quiet, ordered world. She didn't treat him like he was fragile. When they played chess, a game Leo usually won, she was a fierce competitor. When they explored the gardens, she would push his wheelchair at top speed down the smooth stone paths, making him laugh with a pure, unrestrained joy that echoed through the rose bushes. She saw the boy, not the chair. Harrison Croft watched the transformation in his son with a quiet, profound sense of awe. The melancholy that had clung to Leo like a shroud began to dissipate, replaced by a new light in his eyes. He started asking questions again. He engaged more with his tutors. He even started sketching, filling pages with detailed drawings of planets and ships. A creative spark reignited. One sunny afternoon, Harrison was walking through the West Garden when he heard their voices coming from the old oak grove. He stopped behind a large hedge, not wanting to intrude. "But what if you fall?" Leo was asking, a note of anxiety in his voice. Abby was standing beside a low-hanging branch of a massive oak tree. "Then I'll get back up," she said matter-of-factly. "Grandpa always said courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing it anyway." Before Leo could protest further, she scrambled up the thick branch, her sneakers finding easy purchase on the bark. She climbed until she was sitting on the branch, her legs dangling high above his head. "See," she called down. "The view is amazing from up here. You can see the whole city." Leo tilted his head back, shielding his eyes from the sun. He couldn't climb the tree with her, but he could see the world through her eyes. He could feel her bravery. In that moment, he wasn't a boy confined to a chair. He was an adventurer looking up at his fearless friend. A slow smile spread across Harrison's face. He had spent a fortune trying to fix his son's body. He had hired experts to mend what was broken. But he had never understood that what Leo truly needed was someone to help him heal his spirit. Abigail Hayes was doing what an army of doctors and therapists could not. She was teaching him how to be a child again. However, not everyone at the Croft estate viewed this new arrangement with approval. A current of resentment began to flow just beneath the polished surface of the household. The source of this bitterness was Beverly Vance, Harrison's sharp, ambitious executive assistant. Beverly had been with Harrison for nearly a decade. She was ruthlessly efficient, fiercely intelligent, and had made herself indispensable. She managed his schedule, vetted his calls, and acted as the gatekeeper to his intensely private world. Over the years, she had come to see the Croft empire, and Harrison himself, as her domain. The sudden elevation of the maid and her daughter was an anomaly she could not accept. She saw them as an unprofessional, emotional complication. In her mind, Eleanor was an uneducated cleaner playing at being a manager, and Abby was a sentimental distraction. She believed Harrison's decision was a moment of uncharacteristic weakness, a foolish indulgence he would come to regret. And she intended to make sure he did. Her resentment began to manifest in small, subtle acts of sabotage. A crucial supply order for the kitchen, placed by Eleanor, would mysteriously go missing. A message for Eleanor from a contractor would not be delivered, making her appear incompetent. Beverly was an expert at a quiet kind of corporate warfare, and she now applied those skills to the household. Eleanor, sensing the hostility but unable to prove its source, simply worked harder. She double-checked everything. She kept meticulous records. She refused to be rattled. She knew what was at stake, and she would not allow anyone to jeopardize her daughter's future. Beverly soon realized that undermining Eleanor was not enough. The true source of the problem was the bond between the children. It was that bond that had given the Hayes family their unshakable place in Harrison's world. To remove them, she would have to break that bond, and she knew just how to do it. Her opportunity came during the preparations for the annual Croft Foundation Charity Gala, the most important social event of Harrison's year. It was a massive affair held on the estate grounds, drawing in the city's wealthiest and most powerful figures. Beverly was in charge of the entire event, a responsibility she relished. One afternoon, a week before the gala, she found Abby and Leo in the library. They were working on a large, hand-drawn map of the estate, marking a path for a treasure hunt they had designed. Beverly entered with a deceptively warm smile. "What a wonderful map," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You two are quite the artists." Abby beamed, proud of their work. "It's for a game. We're going to hide clues all over the garden." "A lovely idea," Beverly said, her eyes twinkling. "You know, Leo, your father is having a special display set up for the gala. It's a collection of his mother's favorite jewelry. It's going to be in the main gallery. There's one piece in particular, the Croft Star. It's a magnificent diamond necklace. He wants to make sure it's perfectly safe." Leo's eyes widened. "I've seen pictures of it. It's beautiful." Beverly leaned inconspiratorially. "It is. And the security system for the gallery is very complex. Your father was just saying that he needs someone utterly trustworthy to be the last one to check the gallery doors each night before the guards make their final rounds. He said he needed someone who knows the house inside and out, someone who would never, ever be careless." She paused, letting her words sink in. "He was thinking of asking you, Leo. He said you're growing up, and he wants to give you more responsibility." A flush of pride crept up Leo's neck. His father had never entrusted him with anything so important. "Really? Of course," Beverly said smoothly. "But it's a very serious job. It means you can't be distracted. You'd have to promise to be the only one to touch the keypad for the secondary lock." She glanced at Abby. "No games. No friends in the gallery. Just you. Do you think you can handle that?" "Yes," Leo said, his voice firm with a newfound sense of purpose. "I can do it." Abby felt a strange pang of unease. The way Beverly had looked at her felt cold, but she pushed the feeling aside, happy for her friend. It was wonderful that Mr. Croft was trusting Leo with such a big secret. That evening, and for the rest of the week, Leo dutifully performed his task. After the staff had finished setting up the displays for the day, he would go to the gallery alone. He would check that the glass cases were locked, and then, using a special code Beverly had given him, he would engage the secondary electronic lock. It made him feel important, like he was contributing in a real way. The night before the gala, the final pieces were put in place. The Croft Star lay glittering on a bed of black velvet, its dozens of diamonds catching the light. Leo performed his duty with extra care. He checked the lock, the green light on the keypad blinked, and he wheeled himself out, feeling proud. He passed Abby in the hallway. "Is it safe?" she whispered, her eyes wide with excitement. "Perfectly safe," he whispered back, a grin on his face. The next morning, a scream echoed from the main gallery. Eleanor was the first to arrive. She found one of the junior housekeepers standing by the main display case, her face as white as a sheet. The glass was not broken, but the case was open, and the velvet pedestal where the Croft Star had rested was empty. The necklace was gone. Panic erupted. Harrison Croft was summoned, his face a grim, unreadable mask. Security was called. Beverly Vance arrived, her expression a perfect blend of shock and concern. "How is this possible?" Harrison demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The main security system was not breached. The case was forced, but that would have triggered an alarm. Unless, he turned to the security chief. Unless it was never properly locked. The security chief shook his head. "The primary magnetic lock was secure, Mr. Croft. But the secondary electronic lock, it was disengaged. It seems it was turned off sometime after 10 p.m. last night." That's what created the vulnerability. He looked at the keypad log. The last code used was the one assigned to your son. The silence in the room was absolute. Every eye turned to Leo, who had just been wheeled into the gallery by his mother. His face was pale, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Leo. Harrison's voice was strained. Did you lock this room last night? Yes, Dad, I swear I did. Leo insisted, his voice trembling. I checked it. The light turned green. Beverly stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Harrison's arm. Harrison, he's just a boy. Perhaps he was distracted. It's a lot of responsibility. She then looked toward Abby, who was standing beside her mother near the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. Beverly's expression was full of pity, but her words were sharp as glass. Abigail, were you with Leo at all last night? Near the gallery. Abby felt a chill run down her spine. No, I was in my room. I just saw him in the hall after he was done. It's just, we know how much you two love your games, Beverly continued, her tone gentle, but her implication clear. Perhaps you were playing a late-night treasure hunt? It would be easy for a child to forget to press the final button, to get distracted. We weren't playing. Leo cried out, his voice cracking. I did what you told me. I did it alone. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The staff began to whisper. A boy in a wheelchair, easily distracted. His little friend, always running around, leading him on adventures. It was a plausible mistake. A child's mistake, but one with devastating consequences. Harrison looked at his son, his face a storm of conflicting emotions, disappointment, anger, and a deep, painful confusion. He wanted to believe Leo, but the evidence was right there on the keypad log. Eleanor stepped forward, her fear replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. Mr. Croft, my daughter had nothing to do with this. And I know Leo is a responsible boy. Something isn't right here. Beverly gave a sad sigh. Eleanor, no one is blaming the children. Not really. But a $10 million necklace is missing. We have to face the facts. This was a terrible, childish oversight. The word childish hung in the air. It was an indictment not just of the children, but of Harrison's judgment. It was a silent, I told you so from Beverly. She had made her move. She had used Harrison's trust in his own son to frame him, and by extension, to cast a shadow of doubt over the little girl who had become his world. She had severed the very bond she saw as a threat. Leo looked at his father, his eyes pleading. But for the first time, he saw a wall there, a flicker of doubt that broke his heart. He then looked at Abby, who looked back at him, her own face a mask of bewildered terror. The trust that had been the foundation of their friendship was now cracking under the weight of an impossible accusation. The garden cottage no longer felt like a fairy tale. It felt like the beginning of a nightmare. The days that followed were cold and gray, not just in the sky, but within the walls of the Croft mansion. The upcoming gala was officially postponed due to unforeseen circumstances, a sterile announcement that did little to quell the storm of whispers among the staff. The police had come and gone. They had taken statements, dusted for fingerprints, and concluded what Beverly had so neatly suggested. There was no sign of forced entry, making it an internal matter. The insurance investigators were more pointed. They spoke in low, serious tones about liability and negligence. The name of Harrison Croft's son was never mentioned in their official reports, but it hung in the air, a ghost of an accusation. For Leo, the world shrank to the size of his room. The light in his eyes, which had begun to shine so brightly, was extinguished. He refused to leave his chambers, not for his tutoring, not even to go to the library. He would sit for hours by his window, staring at the garden where he and Abby had played, his expression hollow. The trust he'd placed in his father had been a fragile, new thing. Now it was shattered. He felt the sting of his father's doubt, like a physical wound. Harrison Croft retreated behind the walls he had built around himself long ago. He became a man of sharp angles and clipped sentences. He was rarely seen outside his office. When he spoke to Eleanor, it was with a cool, formal distance that had not existed since her first day as a maid. He did not speak about the necklace, about Leo, or about the future. He simply immersed himself in his work, a fortress of numbers and contracts that could not disappoint him. The unspoken tension was a poison seeping into the foundation of their new lives. The garden cottage, once a haven, now felt like a gilded cage. Eleanor performed her duties with a tense, guarded precision. She knew they were on borrowed time. She knew that men like Harrison Croft did not tolerate complications, and her daughter was now at the center of the biggest complication of all. But Abby was her grandfather's granddaughter. General Hayes had taught her that you don't retreat when the battle gets tough. You stand your ground. You fight for what's right. And she knew, with the unshakable certainty of a child's heart, that Leo was telling the truth, which meant someone else was lying. Her gaze kept falling on Beverly Vance. She watched the executive assistant move through the mansion with a newfound air of command. Beverly was always busy, always efficient, her heels clicking with purpose on the marble floors. She was now in charge of liaising with the insurance company and the police. She spoke with a tone of deep regret about the unfortunate incident, always managing to sound sympathetic while subtly reinforcing the narrative of a child's careless mistake. Abby started to notice things. Small things. She noticed that Beverly had a habit of twisting the silver pin she always carried when she was concentrating. She noticed that the woman's smile never, ever reached her eyes. And she noticed the scent of her perfume, a strong, floral scent, like jasmine. It was a scent Abby had come to associate with Beverly's presence in a room. One afternoon, driven by a restless need to do something, Abby went to the gallery. It was closed, of course, a velvet rope strung across the entrance. But she didn't want to go in. She was interested in the small security office next door, a room she'd never paid attention to before. The door was slightly ajar. The estate's head of security, a burly man named Mr. Evans, was inside, speaking on the phone in a low voice. Abby lingered in the hallway, pretending to admire a large painting. She could hear snippets of his conversation. No, the system logs are clear. The only anomaly was the secondary lock. Yes, the code was the boy's. The only other person with override access to that specific lock is Ms. Vance, for programming purposes, but her code wasn't used that night. Abby's heart gave a little jump. Beverly had a code. Later that day, she found Leo in his room. He was refusing to eat his lunch. His caregiver, a new woman who replaced the disgraced Ms. Albright, was trying to coax him, without success. Abby walked in, and the caregiver, knowing of her special status with the boy, gave a relieved nod and left them alone. "I'm not hungry," Leo mumbled, not looking at her. "I know you didn't do it," Abby said quietly. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a miserable skepticism. "My dad thinks I did." "Adults get things wrong sometimes," Abby stated. "Even smart ones." She pulled a chair closer to his wheelchair. "Leo, I need you to think. The night it happened, when Beverly gave you the code, was there anything weird? Anything at all?" Leo frowned, trying to remember. "No. She just told me how important it was. She said my dad was trusting me. She made me promise not to tell anyone the code, not even you." "She told you not to tell me?" Abby asked, leaning forward. "Yeah," Leo said. "She said it was a test of my ability to keep a secret, to be responsible, all by myself." Abby's mind raced. It was a perfect trap. By isolating Leo, by making the responsibility entirely his, Beverly had ensured no one else could corroborate his story. She had made him the sole guardian of a secret that was designed to fail. "Okay," Abby said, her mind working. "What about after you locked it? You saw me in the hall. Did you see anyone else?" Leo shook his head. "No. The staff was all downstairs getting ready for their shift change. The upstairs was empty." Abby stood up and began to pace. An idea was forming in her mind, a wild and improbable one, but it was all she had. She remembered something else her grandfather had told her. The enemy's greatest strength is often their greatest weakness. Beverly's strength was her meticulous planning, her control. She wouldn't have done something clumsy. The theft had to be as clean and precise as everything else she did. So how had she done it? She thought back to the security chief's words. Her code wasn't used. That meant she couldn't have just walked up and unlocked it. But she had override access. What did that mean? "Leo," she said, stopping in front of him. "What if the lock was never really on?" Leo looked confused. "But I saw the green light. It blinked. I checked it." "I know you did," Abby said. "But what if the green light could lie?" That was it. The key. It had to be. Beverly hadn't used her code because she didn't need to. She had manipulated the system beforehand. She was the one who programmed it, after all. She could have set it up so that when Leo entered his code, the light would turn green, but the lock itself would disengage 10 minutes later. It would be a perfect crime, leaving Leo's code as the last one in the system log before the failure. But it was a theory, a 10-year-old's guess. She had no proof. How could she possibly prove it? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Beverly. She stood in the doorway, a file in her hand, her expression one of cool professionalism. "Abigail," she said, her voice clipped. "Your mother is looking for you. And Leo, your father would like to see you in his office." Leo paled. He hadn't had a real conversation with his father in days. Abby gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze before she left, but her mind was buzzing. She walked down the hallway, her sneakers silent on the plush carpet. But instead of going to find her mother, she ducked into a small alcove that housed a marble statue. It was directly across the hall from the security office. She held her breath, listening. She heard the soft whir of Leo's wheelchair as he went toward his father's office. A moment later, she heard the click-clack of Beverly's heels. But they weren't going toward the office. They were going to the security room. Abby peeked around the statue. The door to the security office was now closed. A sliver of light was visible underneath. What was Beverly doing in there? Abby knew she shouldn't. It was dangerous. It was breaking every rule. But she couldn't stop herself. She crept over to the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed her ear to the cold, heavy wood. She heard the soft tapping of a computer keyboard. Then Beverly's voice, low and urgent. She was on the phone. "It's handled," Beverly said. "The final insurance report is being filed tomorrow. They've ruled it negligence. No, there's no way to trace it back to me. The system logs are clean. As far as anyone is concerned, the kid screwed up. Yes, the necklace is secure. It's better than cash. I'll be leaving after the settlement comes through." A quiet resignation. "Harrison will be so preoccupied with his disappointing son, he'll barely notice I'm gone." There was a pause. Abby held her breath, praying the floorboards wouldn't creak. "Stop worrying," Beverly snapped into the phone. "The only people who could possibly figure this out are a 10-year-old girl and a boy in a wheelchair. And nobody is going to believe them." The line went dead. Abby heard the scrape of a chair, the click of a deadbolt. She scrambled back to her hiding spot just as the door opened. Beverly walked out, her face a mask of calm composure. She didn't even glance in Abby's direction. She walked down the hall and disappeared down the grand staircase. Abby leaned against the wall, her legs shaking. She had it. She had the proof. But the words echoed in her ears. Nobody is going to believe them. She was the maid's daughter. He was the boy who had already been blamed. Beverly was the trusted assistant, the one who held all the power. Who would Harrison Croft believe? His efficient, loyal employee of 10 years, or 2 children with a wild story about a lying green light? She had to tell someone. She ran to find her mother. She found Eleanor in the main kitchen, overseeing the evening meal preparations. Abby pulled her into the pantry, her words tumbling out in a frantic, whispered rush. She told her everything. The override code, the theory about the lock, the phone call she had just overheard. Eleanor listened, her face growing paler with every word. She believed her daughter. She had never for a second doubted her. But she was also a pragmatist. She knew the world they were up against. "Abby, honey, are you absolutely sure?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "You heard her say all of this?" "Yes, I swear," Abby insisted. Eleanor wrung her hands. A child's testimony against a woman like Beverly. "Mr. Croft, he's not thinking clearly right now. He's hurt. If we go to him with this and we're wrong, or if he doesn't believe us," she didn't need to finish. "They would be out of the mansion before the sun set. All of it, the cottage, the job, the trust fund, Leo's friendship, it would all be gone. They would lose everything." But then Eleanor looked into her daughter's eyes. She saw the same fire, the same unwavering sense of justice she had seen in her own father, the general. He would never have backed down from a fight for what was right, no matter the odds. And she couldn't either. "Okay," Eleanor said, her voice suddenly firm. "Okay, we're going to do this. But we have to be smart. We need more than just your word. We need proof that even a man like Harrison Croft can't deny." The question was, how? Beverly was too clever to leave a trail. She had said the necklace was secure. That meant it wasn't in her room or her office. It would be somewhere no one would ever think to look. How do you find a $10 million necklace in a house with more than 50 rooms? The answer, when it came, was not from a clever deduction, but from a child's memory. "The treasure hunt," Abby whispered, her eyes widening. "The map." Eleanor looked at her, confused. "What map?" The map Leo and I were making, Abby explained, her voice getting faster with excitement. Before all this happened, Beverly saw us with it. In the library. She was looking at it right before she started talking about the necklace. They rushed to the library. The large sheet of paper was still lying on the side table where they had left it, forgotten in the chaos of the past week. It was a child's drawing of the estate grounds, with little X's marking the spots for their make-believe treasure. She looked at it for a long time, Abby said, her finger tracing the lines they had drawn. We marked all our favorite places. The old oak tree, the koi pond, the abandoned greenhouse at the far end of the garden. Eleanor's eyes followed her daughter's finger to the last spot. The old greenhouse. It was a dilapidated structure, scheduled for demolition. No one ever went there. It was full of broken pots, rusted tools, and overgrown weeds. It was the perfect hiding place. A place no one would ever search. A place suggested by the very children she was framing. The irony was as cruel as it was brilliant. Come on, Eleanor said, her jaw set with a grim determination. And bring a flashlight. It's going to be dark soon. The air had grown cold. A sharp wind rustled the leaves as mother and daughter slipped out the back door of the mansion. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows of the manicured hedges. The greenhouse stood at the edge of the property, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. Its glass panes were clouded with grime, and several were broken. The door creaked open on rusted hinges. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Moonlight streamed in through the broken roof, casting long, eerie shadows across the cluttered interior. What are we looking for? Eleanor whispered, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Something that doesn't belong, Abby whispered back. They searched methodically. They looked under rotting wooden benches, inside stacks of dusty clay pots, behind piles of old fertilizer bags. The minutes ticked by. Doubt began to creep into Eleanor's mind. What if they were wrong? What if this was just a wild goose chase, a child's fantasy? Abby, however, was focused. She was thinking like Beverly. Clever. Precise. Hidden in plain sight. Her eyes scanned the workbench that ran along the back wall. It was covered in junk. Old trowels, empty seed packets, a half-empty bottle of weed killer, and a small, unassuming terracotta pot, no different from the dozens of others scattered around. But this one was different. There was no dirt in it. And sitting on the bench beneath it was a small circle of dust-free wood, as if the pot had only recently been placed there. Her heart pounding, Abby reached for it. It was heavier than it should have been. She turned it over. Taped to the bottom of the pot, inside a thick plastic bag, was a heavy, glittering mass. Eleanor shone the flashlight on it. The beam of light exploded into 1,000 tiny, brilliant stars. It was the Croft star. The diamonds seemed to drink in the light, cold and beautiful and terrible. They had found it. They had the proof. But as they stood there, frozen in a moment of triumph and terror, a shadow fell across the doorway. I thought I might find you here. Beverly Vance stood silhouetted against the moonlight. In her hand was a heavy iron gardening trowel. Her face was no longer a mask of cool professionalism. It was a twisted, ugly thing, contorted by fury and desperation. It's a shame, really, Beverly said, taking a step into the greenhouse, the trowel held like a weapon. I was so close. But you just couldn't leave it alone, could you? You and that pathetic little boy. Her eyes fixed on the necklace in Abby's hands. Give that to me. Eleanor pushed Abby behind her, her body forming a protective shield. It's over, Beverly, she said, her voice shaking but firm. We're calling Mr. Croft. We're calling the police. Beverly laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I don't think so. You see, the story is already written. A distraught maid and her delinquent daughter, caught trying to flee with the stolen necklace they've been hiding all along. It's tragic, really, but so much more believable. She lunged. Eleanor reacted with the pure, primal instinct of a mother protecting her child. As Beverly lunged, Eleanor shoved Abby behind her and simultaneously kicked out, knocking over a stack of empty clay pots. They shattered on the concrete floor, the sharp sound echoing in the small space. It was a desperate, clumsy defense, but it bought them a precious second. Beverly stumbled, her ankle twisting on a broken shard, letting out a sharp cry of pain. You'll regret that, she hissed, her face contorted in a mask of rage. She regained her balance, her eyes dark with a chilling malice. She was bigger than Eleanor, stronger, and she was cornered. While Beverly's attention was on Eleanor, Abby acted. Her mind flashed with her grandfather's stories, not of grand battles, but of small, clever tactics. Use the terrain. Use what the enemy doesn't see. Her eyes darted around the cluttered greenhouse. Her gaze landed on the workbench, the half-empty bottle of weed killer, the thick, rubber hose of a nearby watering can. As Beverly advanced on her mother, Abby scrambled behind the workbench. Her small hands fumbled with the nozzle on the hose. She aimed it at the floor directly in front of Beverly's feet and squeezed the handle with all her might. A powerful jet of stagnant, murky water shot out, creating a wide, slick puddle on the smooth concrete. Beverly, focused entirely on Eleanor, didn't see it. She took another determined step forward, and her expensive leather shoe hit the slick patch. Her feet went out from under her. With a shocked gasp, she flailed wildly, the iron trowel flying from her grasp. It clattered uselessly into a dark corner. She landed hard on her back, the air knocked out of her lungs in a painful whoosh. For a moment, there was only the sound of her gasping for breath. Eleanor rushed to Abby, pulling her into a fierce embrace. They were safe, but they were not out of danger. Suddenly, the doorway was filled with light. Multiple flashlight beams cut through the darkness, pinning them in a harsh glare. "Nobody move," a man's voice boomed. It was Mr. Evans, the head of security, flanked by two of his guards. And just behind them, his face pale and etched with a terrible, dawning understanding, was Harrison Croft. By his side, in his wheelchair, was Leo. It was Leo who had saved them. After Beverly had summoned him to his father's office, he had found the room empty. A cold knot of fear had tightened in his stomach. He knew Abby had been onto something. He knew she was looking for clues. And he knew she was in danger. He had gone straight to the security office, only to find his father already there, a deep frown on his face as he stared at a monitor. "What is it, Dad?" Leo had asked. "It's the perimeter alarms," Harrison had said, distracted. "A silent alert just tripped in the old greenhouse. I was about to send Evans to check it out." Leo's blood ran cold. "The greenhouse? That's on our treasure map. Dad, Abby is there. I think Beverly went after her." The urgency and terror in his son's voice had finally broken through Harrison's cold reserve. He had seen the truth in his son's eyes. He had called for Evans and his men, and they had raced across the lawn, arriving just in time to witness the aftermath of the confrontation. Now, standing in the doorway, Harrison's gaze took in the scene. He saw Eleanor and Abby, huddled together, frightened but defiant. He saw the glittering diamond necklace clutched in the little girl's hand. And he saw his trusted executive assistant, the woman he had relied on for a decade, lying defeated and exposed on the grimy floor. The truth settled over him, brutal and undeniable. Beverly struggled to sit up, her face a mess of dirt and humiliation. "Harrison, thank God you're here. They attacked me. They had the necklace." But her lies had run out. Harrison Croft looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her not as his efficient assistant, but as a venomous stranger. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it was as cold and sharp as breaking ice. "Evans," he said, never taking his eyes off Beverly. "Detain Ms. Vance. Call the police. Tell them we have apprehended the person responsible for the theft of the Croft Star, and that she will be charged with assault as well." The fight went out of Beverly completely. Her face crumpled, the mask of fury replaced by the pathetic, empty look of true defeat. The guards moved in, helping her to her feet and securing her hands. As they led her away, she shot one last, venomous glare at Abby. It didn't matter. She was powerless now. Harrison walked slowly into the greenhouse. He knelt, his expensive suit heedless of the dirt and broken pottery, until he was eye level with Abby. He looked at the necklace in her hand, then into her wide, honest eyes. There were no words of thanks that felt adequate. He simply reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were brave," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "Your grandfather would be very proud." He then looked at Eleanor, and in his gaze was a profound apology. For his doubt, for his distance, for failing to see the truth that had been right in front of him. "Eleanor," he said, his voice raw, "I am so sorry." Eleanor simply nodded, tears of relief finally streaming down her face. She held Abby tighter, her small, fierce daughter who had faced down the monster and won. But it was his own son Harrison needed to face. He stood up and turned to Leo. The boy was watching him, his expression wary, his heart still bruised by the sting of his father's distrust. Harrison walked over to him, the space between them feeling like a vast canyon. He crouched down in front of the wheelchair, placing his hands on his son's knees. For the first time, the powerful billionaire looked vulnerable. Leo, he began, his voice cracking. I failed you. I doubted you. And that is a mistake a father should never make. I was so blinded by the evidence. I forgot to look at what mattered most. Your character. Your honesty. Can you ever forgive me? Leo looked at his father, at the genuine pain and regret in his eyes. He saw not the cold titan of industry, but just a man. Just his dad. A slow tear traced a path down Leo's cheek, and he nodded. I forgive you, Dad. Harrison Croft pulled his son into a hug, a real, heartfelt embrace that was years overdue. He held him tightly, the cold, empty spaces in his heart filling with a warmth he had thought long lost. Over his son's shoulder, he looked at Abigail Hayes, the little girl with blonde hair and a hero's heart, who had given him back his son. He knew then that his life, and theirs, was forever changed. He hadn't just found a friend for his son. He had found a family. In the years that followed, the Croft estate was transformed. It was no longer a silent, cavernous showpiece. It was a home, filled with the sounds of laughter and life. The story of that night in the greenhouse became a quiet legend among the staff, a testament to the courage of the maid's daughter. Harrison Croft changed. The ruthless businessman was still there, but he was tempered by a new understanding of what truly mattered. He began to spend less time in the boardroom and more time with his son. He learned about the constellations and read adventure stories aloud. He discovered a joy in the simple act of being a father, a joy he had almost let slip through his fingers. He was true to his word, and more. The trust fund he had established for Abby was expanded beyond comprehension, ensuring she would never have to worry about anything for the rest of her life. But he gave her something far more valuable. He gave her a permanent place in their family. Eleanor was no longer just the house manager. She was a trusted confidant, a friend, and the co-matriarch of their unconventional household. The garden cottage remained their private space, but they spent most of their time in the main house, two families woven into one. Leo flourished. With the cloud of his father's doubt lifted, and with Abby's constant, fearless companionship, he began to push his own boundaries. Harrison, spurred by a new sense of hope, sought out the most innovative physical therapists in the world. They worked with Leo for hours each day, using experimental techniques and robotics. The progress was slow, agonizingly so, but it was there. First, he was able to stand, supported by braces. Then, with the help of crutches, he took his first, halting step since the accident that had put him in the chair years ago. Abby was there for every milestone, cheering him on, refusing to let him give up when the pain and frustration became too much. She remained his best friend, his sister, his fiercest ally. On Leo's 18th birthday, Harrison threw a grand party. It wasn't the stuffy, formal affair of years past. The garden was filled with lights, music, and all of their friends. At the height of the celebration, Harrison stood to make a toast. He raised his glass, his eyes finding Eleanor and Abby in the crowd. Many of you know the story of my family, he said, his voice clear and strong. But you may not know the most important chapter. It began not with a business deal, but with an act of kindness. With a peanut butter sandwich, offered by a little girl to a lonely boy. He smiled, his gaze shifting to his son. Leo was standing near the great oak tree, leaning on his crutches, tall and confident. Beside him, Abby, now a young woman on the cusp of leaving for college, was laughing at something he had said. They were inseparable, their bond forged in kindness and tempered by fire. That simple act of grace changed everything. Harrison continued. It taught me that the greatest assets we can ever possess are not found in a bank vault or a stock portfolio. They are found in the courage to do what is right, the loyalty to stand by those you love, and the compassion to see the humanity in others. To Abigail and Eleanor Hayes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be rich. You are my family. Later that evening, Abby and Leo stood by the koi pond, the water shimmering under the party lights. He's right. You know, Leo said quietly, looking at her. You did change everything. Abby shrugged, a small smile on her face. You would have been fine without me. No, he said, his voice serious. I wouldn't have been. You climbed a tree, Abby. You showed me the view from up there. And you never let me forget it was possible. She looked at her friend, at the boy whose life had become so intertwined with her own. Her grandfather, General Hayes, had passed away peacefully 2 years prior. In one of their last conversations, he had told her, "Honor isn't about the medals on your chest, Abby. It's about the choices you make when no one is watching." She had made a choice that rainy evening 9 years ago. She had chosen to share her dinner with a lonely boy. It was a small thing, a simple thing, but it had started a chain reaction of events that had unraveled a world of secrets, exposed a terrible lie, and built a new world from the ashes of the old. She had offered a sandwich, but she had been given a father, a brother, and a life she could never have imagined. And she knew, with a deep and abiding certainty, that this was only the beginning. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.